He had never built a gun. He hadn't even held one in 30 years. He made curtain rods in a garage with his wife, and in 3 months, this man humiliated Beretta, SIG Sauer, Heckler, and Koch, and every armorer who had spent a century perfecting their craft. They laughed when he walked into the room. 40 years later, 2 out of every 3 police officers in America carry his design. And before this story is over, a hired assassin will try to beat him to death with a rubber mallet and lose. This is how a man who knew absolutely nothing about guns built the most feared pistol on earth. Austria, 1980. The army has a problem. Their standard sidearm is a Walther P38, a pistol designed before the Second World War, a relic from another era. It is obsolete and everyone knows it. So the Austrian Ministry of Defense sits down and writes a list. 17 requirements for a new service pistol. The pistol had to survive being dropped on steel without firing. It had to keep working after being frozen, buried in sand, and dragged through water. It had to fire 15,000 rounds, then take a test cartridge at nearly double the normal pressure without blowing up in the shooter's hand. It had to be light, simple, and built from as few parts as humanly possible. It was on paper almost impossible. The ministry mails this list to every great gunmaker in Europe, and they all answer. Heckler Koch answers. SIG Sauer answers. Beretta answers, a company that has been forging weapons since the year 1526 before Austria was even an empire. FN Herstal of Belgium answers. And Steyr, Austria's own national arms manufacturer, answers. These are titans. Between them, they have armed the soldiers of 2 world wars, the police of an entire continent, and special forces in a dozen countries. They employ thousands of gunsmiths, ballistics experts, and weapons engineers. Their experience is measured in centuries. And then there is one more man, 52 years old, from Deutsch Wagram, a quiet little town just outside Vienna. He reads the exact same list of 17 requirements. His name is Gaston Glock. His factory makes curtain rods, window fittings, and field knives for the army. He has never designed a firearm in his entire life. He has never manufactured one. He has barely touched a gun in 30 years, and he decides he is going to win. The established manufacturers thought this was hilarious. A curtain rod maker competing against the greatest names in the history of firearms. They should not have laughed, because they were about to be taught the most expensive lesson the gun industry had ever seen. To understand how he beat them, you have to understand one strange thing about him. The thing none of them saw coming. So who was this man? Gaston Glock was born in Vienna in 1929, the son of a railway worker. No fortune, no factory, no family tradition of engineering, nothing that pointed to what was coming. As a teenager, he was pulled into the dying German army in the last weeks of the war, came home before he ever saw real combat, finished his engineering education, and took a quiet job at a company that made hand drills. An ordinary start, but that workbench is where everything was secretly being set up. Because there, Gaston Glock learned the things the gun industry had stopped thinking about. He learned about materials, about tolerances, about what happens to metal when it is stressed thousands of times over. And above all, he learned about polymers, synthetic plastics, injection molding, the behavior of man-made materials under pressure. He understood these things at a level almost no firearms engineer in Austria ever bothered to reach. Because firearms engineers did not think about plastic. Guns were made of steel that had been the unquestioned law since Samuel Colt patented the revolver back in 1836. Steel was strength. Steel was the gun. Everyone knew it. In 1963, Glock founded his own company. It ran out of his garage with his wife working beside him. They made curtain rods, plastic curtain rods, metal fittings for doors and windows. Small, unglamorous, precise. There was absolutely nothing about this little business to suggest that its owner would one day bring the proudest weapons makers on the planet to their knees. But through the 1970s, Glock began winning contracts with the Austrian military. The army needed field knives, Glock made them. The army needed entrenching tools, the small folding shovels soldiers dig with, Glock made those too. Training grenades, cartridge belt links, polymer parts for military gear, and every single contract taught him the same lesson over and over. He learned exactly what a soldier's equipment has to be: brutally durable, dead simple, impossible to break, and cheap enough that a peacetime army can actually afford it. By 1980, he had bought an injection molding machine just to make the plastic handles for the knives he was already supplying. And the people he hired to run it did not come from the gun world at all. They came from the camera industry. People who understood precision plastic components measured in fractions of a millimeter applied to materials most gunsmiths thought were only good enough for toys. This was the man. This was the company. Curtain rods, knife handles, and a garage. And what happened next is one of the most improbable stories in the entire history of manufacturing. Glock was at the Ministry of Defense one day there to talk about his polymer supply contracts. Nothing more. He was waiting in a hallway when he overheard two senior officers talking. They were discussing the search for the new service pistol, the aging Walther, the manufacturers who would bid, and Gaston Glock, the curtain rod man, walked over, introduced himself, and told them his company could build it. The officers did not take him seriously. Of course they didn't. Here was a man who made window fittings proposing to defeat Heckler Koch, SIG Sauer, Beretta, FN Herstal, and Steyr. Companies with centuries of combined experience. Companies that had armed the armies that won and lost the great wars of the century. Glock had none of that. No gunsmiths, no ballistics lab, no heritage. He had a plastic injection machine, a workshop full of curtain rod equipment, and a mind that had never once been told what a pistol was supposed to look like. And later he said something that explains everything. He said the fact that he knew nothing about guns was his greatest advantage. He was not being humble. He was being precise. Think about it. Every other company chasing that Austrian contract started from the same place, their own existing designs. Heckler & Koch submitted versions of pistols they already made. SIG offered the P220 and P226. Beretta brought a variant of the 92. FN proposed an updated Browning. Steyr entered a design it had already built. Every single one of them was an evolution, a better version of something old. Each one carried the weight of its maker's assumptions, decades of inherited belief about what a pistol must be. And all of them were made of steel because pistols were made of steel. Glock had no old design to improve, no assumptions to inherit, no factory built for metal frames, no veteran engineers who would scoff at a plastic gun because plastic guns had never truly worked. He was starting from absolute zero. And then he did something no established manufacturer would ever have lowered themselves to do. He went out and bought his competitors' pistols, the Beretta, the SIG, the CZ75, a modern Walther. He carried them back to his workshop, took them apart on his bench, and studied them, where each one was strong, where each one was weak, where each one carried clumsy, pointless complexity that everyone had simply learned to accept. Then he assembled a team, but not a team of gunsmiths. He gathered military officers, police firearms instructors, champion competition shooters, the people who actually carried pistols and depended on them. He hired a pair of engineers who had worked on some of the earliest plastic-framed pistol experiments ever attempted, and he asked all of them one simple question, the question that no master gunsmith had ever thought to ask. If you could design a combat pistol from nothing with no rules and no tradition holding you back, what would it actually be? And their answers all pointed the same way. More rounds in the magazine, more reliability, simpler operation, lighter weight, fewer parts, easier to clean. A trigger that felt the same every single time so a soldier under fire never had to stop and think. A pistol so simple that a frightened recruit could strip it down in seconds and never get it wrong. Within 3 months, Gaston Glock had a working prototype. 3 months. A man who had never built a firearm in his life produced a functioning combat pistol in 90 days. He called it the Glock 17, not because it held 17 rounds, though it did, but because it was the 17th patent of his life. A man who made his name on curtain rods now held a patent that would change warfare. And here is why it worked. The Glock had 34 parts. Its competitors had far more. Its frame was polymer, lighter than steel, cheaper than steel, and it would never rust. It had no external safety lever, not because he forgot one, but because he made a deliberate, radical choice. The single most common mistake in a real gunfight is forgetting to flip the safety off. So Glock built the safety into the trigger itself and removed the lever entirely. Every part he deleted was one less thing that could fail.
Every gram he saved was a gram a soldier didn't have to carry. It wasn't a cheaper gun, it was a smarter one. His lack of experience was not a weakness, it was the weapon. He did not know what could not be done, so he simply did it. The Glock won the Austrian trials. The curtain rod maker beat the Titans on their own ground. The army ordered 25,000 pistols, and that was only the beginning. Word spread fast. Police departments and armies around the world began testing this strange plastic pistol from Austria, and again, it outperformed guns from companies 10 times its age. And the legends were left scrambling. They had to tear out manufacturing lines built for steel and invest in the polymer technology they had mocked. They had to retrain their engineers. They had to convince their own customers that plastic could be trusted, while Glock already had years of real field data, military adoption, and police on the streets swearing by it. The Titans had prototypes and promises. Glock had a decade head start, and then something happened that no engineer could have planned. The Glock became a legend in culture itself. It appeared in films, in music, in video games. Its name became shorthand for the modern pistol. Rivals had spent centuries building reputations through war and craftsmanship, and a company that had been making window fittings a few years earlier became the most recognized handgun name on the planet. Police trusted it, soldiers trusted it, and the public knew its name even if they had never held a gun in their lives. The curtain rod maker had not just built a better pistol, he had built an icon. But the most astonishing chapter of this story is not about engineering at all. In July of 1999, Gaston Glock discovered that one of his most trusted financial advisors had been quietly stealing millions from the company over many years. It was a betrayal from a man he had led into the very center of his empire. When Glock confronted him, the man did not confess and beg. He chose to make the problem disappear. He hired a professional killer, a French mercenary and former wrestler, to murder Glock and stage it as an accident. They ambushed the 70-year-old in a dim underground parking garage in Luxembourg. There were no witnesses. The assassin came at him swinging a heavy rubber mallet, striking him again and again in the head, expecting a frail old man to go down fast. And Gaston Glock fought back. This 70-year-old man, bleeding from his skull, turned on his attacker and beat him into the concrete. He knocked the assassin out cold. He knocked several of the man's teeth clean out of his head. The killer woke up in custody. Glock survived. The company went on. The same man who had humiliated the entire Western arms industry by building a better gun out of curtain rod technology had now survived a contract killing by punching the hired murderer unconscious in a parking garage. The world kept underestimating Gaston Glock, and the world kept being wrong. He ran his company exactly the way he designed his pistol. Minimal complexity, maximum function. He kept it privately held, no stock market, no outside investors, no quarterly demands to cut corners. And that structure protected him from the disease that was killing his rivals. Look at what happened to the others. Colt, the company that defined the American handgun for 150 years, went bankrupt twice. Remington, founded in 1816, was bought by a private equity firm, drowned in debt, and collapsed into bankruptcy again and again. Smith & Wesson even changed its corporate name to escape its own reputation. The American gun industry became a graveyard of legendary names devoured by debt and mismanagement. Glock avoided every bit of it. Never sold, never merged, never gutted by financiers looking to strip it for parts. The company that started by making curtain rods in a garage stayed under the control of the man who founded it right up until his death on the 27th of December, 2023. He was 94 years old, and the numbers he left behind are staggering. More than 20 million Glock pistols have been built since 1982. The design has passed through 6 generations, but the core has never changed. The same polymer frame, the same safe action trigger, the same 34 parts. A Glock made today works on the exact same principles as a Glock made over 40 years ago. It was so close to perfect from the very start that 4 decades of improvement have produced only refinements, never a reinvention. Today, Glock pistols are carried by roughly 65% of all law enforcement in the United States. They arm the militaries of dozens of nations. They are NATO classified. They are trusted by special operations units whose names will never be made public. In 2020, the Glock won the French military trials, beating out rivals and replacing pistols that had served for decades. From Vienna to Paris, from American police departments to battlefields across the world, the little company from a town outside Vienna now arms more soldiers and police officers worldwide than any other pistol maker on the planet. And it remains to this day exactly what Gaston Glock built it to be: simple, brutal, and almost impossible to break. The pistol he designed in 90 days outlived every expert who laughed at him. And it all came back to one thing. Every great gunmaker in 1980 knew exactly what could not be done. They had spent their entire careers learning the limits. Beretta had been building weapons since 1526, SIG since 1853. That accumulated wisdom, those centuries of hard-won knowledge, that was the very thing that trapped them. It was the cage that stopped them from building what Gaston Glock built in 3 months in a workshop that had been stamping out curtain rods the year before. He had no wisdom to hold him back. He simply asked the one question no expert dared to ask. What if we started from zero? The curtain rods are gone now. The knife handles are gone. The little garage in Deutsch Wagram is gone. But the pistol endures in the holsters of 3 out of 4 American police officers, in the armories of NATO, in the hands of soldiers on every continent on Earth. 34 parts, 22 ounces, and one engineer's stubborn refusal to believe the answer had already been found. They laughed when he walked into that room. A curtain rod maker, 0 gun experience, 3 months of work, and every armorer on Earth is still trying to catch up.